In the house, it is the State Auditor Shad White. Good morning, sir. How are you on a Monday morning?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. I have to say I'm more excited about Top Gun than Doctor Strange. I'm not going to see anything until Top Gun comes out. That's my position.
There you go. When is that coming out?
The 27th. Everyone should know, Paul, the 27th. There's a giant billboard on I-55 telling you that it's the 27th. Really? Oh, yeah.
What is he going to be doing, flying a crop duster or what?
I think that's right. It. I think they decided to put the actors in the planes. This is not what I planned on talking about here, but I think they put the actors in the planes to make them, make their faces peel back as they cut some G's there. I'm excited about it.
This is the final question on this. We have valuable time, but is he going to be an instructor on this one? Or
I think he's the Top Gun.
Sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think he's the Top Gun instructor. That's right.
To matters that are not as exciting, but I do want to ask you, is there still a gag order out as far as the MDHS?
Yes. So there were multiple gag orders.
It hasn't mitigated itself with the guilty pleas at all? Or
So there were multiple gag orders in place, some in the Nancy New and Zach New case, and then one in the John Davis case. Of course, when Zach and Nancy New pled guilty, those gag orders went away, but John Davis's trial is set for November, so that gag order still exists.
What can you tell us? Is there any updates at all, or is there anything new that you can tell us?
Well, I've sort of made a commitment to not do any sort of long-form interview or anything like that as this case goes on, but I can tell you what I've said previously, that, of course, Nancy and Zach New pled guilty. I think that's a very important step for achieving justice for the taxpayers in this case. We know, of course, that this is the largest public fraud case in state history, at least according to our records. So we're going to keep working, and we'll see where the case goes from here.
Has your office looked at everybody in this one, as far as the from the governor on down to the janitor? Has everybody been covered on this?
I can tell you that everybody's going to be investigated fully. The entire case will be investigated fully. I've said that previously. And if for some reason somebody doubts our willingness to investigate everything fully, we've turned over and given access to everything that we have to the FBI over 2 years ago. So we've literally got somebody who can check our work if folks doubt that. This case is going to be fully investigated.
But there were some news reports that said you hadn't turned that over, but that's incorrect reporting?
That's incorrect. That's a lie.
When was it turned over?
2 years ago. I tweeted it, actually. You can go back and look at the Twitter. It's documented for future generations on the Twitter.
The reporting from a national basis to a state basis sometimes, and for people I'm not a journalist, for people who I'm on an opinion medium, but people who call themselves journalists, they have absolutely failed their readers and viewers in this country as far as journalism is concerned, and that's. Sometimes you see 4 or 5 different episodes or explanations per day where they go back and retract themselves, and it's a shame. So anything new with this? You said there's nothing new with this one, but it just continues.
That's correct, yeah. So the next trial date is for November, and we'll see how the case progresses.
What else are you working on?
Something else that I've been concerned with, and I think most Mississippians are concerned with, is the crime wave that we have seen in Jackson. We're working on a report right now to quantify the cost of crime in the state of Mississippi. So quantify the cost of, say, each individual homicide that happens. I think it's my role as state auditor to not just put a stop to fraud, put a stop to misspending, but also since about the 90s, the state auditor's office has had this statutory ability to look at questions that are important to Mississippians and try to quantify the cost to the taxpayers. So you may remember a couple of months ago, Paul, we did a big study on brain drain to see how much it was costing taxpayers to educate young people in our public universities, and then how many of those folks were we actually keeping after we educated them. We're going to do something similar for crime, and really this is taking on for me a more personal, place of importance, because a few weeks ago I was heading off to National Guard drill for the weekend, and typically when I go off for National Guard drill, I try to find some stuff for my wife to do with our 2 girls, ages 3 and 8 months, and so I'll try to get together some list of events going on in Jackson and in Mississippi and send them to her. That particular week, I sent my wife a link to the Mississippi Mudbugs Festival, and thank God they did not go. They ended up not going to that while I was in National Guard drill. But I can only imagine the guilt and the grief that I would feel if they had gone to that and if they had been hurt. So, this is important to everybody, but to me personally, it's particularly important right now that we have a real conversation about how to put a stop to crime in the state of Mississippi.
I've had this one in the stack it's been several days now, last week, and I shouldn't do this without knowing where this came from, but this is a report on guns, and you may have seen this. Guns were the weapon of choice in 85.1% of the state's homicide, 71% of suicides, according to, here goes, backgroundchecks.org. Of the homicides reported in 2020 across the U.S., 74.5 were committed with guns, almost 62% suicides were gun-related. But they gave some stats in Mississippi. Louisiana came in a close second. According to the FBI, 91% of Mississippi homicides were committed with a firearm. I don't know why anybody should be surprised with that. And I'm not sure if it changed that much over the last few years. Harrison County ranked 18th in the nation in small metropolitan areas in the country, averaging 22.5 gun-related deaths per 1,000. The county ranked higher than a Florida county, and it was one of the highest in the nation in Harrison County. I was not aware of that.
Well, I can tell you, just to layer some data on top of that, the CDC tracks states by their per capita number of deaths due to homicide, and Mississippi is now number one under the most recent rankings that they have put out. You can look back, of course, many people know that in 2021, Jackson was the per capita capital of homicides in the United States for major metro areas. So we got a big problem in Mississippi, and it's a Jackson problem, and we can pick up the newspaper and see that. But it's not just a Jackson problem. We've got spillover crime. You go talk to folks in rural areas, go talk to folks in cities like Columbus, Mississippi. They're experiencing this too, and we've got to find a way to get at this problem. One basic way to get at it is more police. I mean, there is a mountain of social science studies, and the Manhattan Institute has done some work on this to show this. There's a mountain of social science studies that show that more police equals less crime. It's not particularly complicated. More police equals less crime. So that's part of the solution, but another part of the conversation here is the fact that we've got so many young men who grow up without daddies, and they grow up without discipline in the home, and they grow up without anybody teaching them right from wrong, and without the increased discipline of two parents in the home. And as a result, what you get when they get to be military-age males, which is like, let's say, 17 to my age, 40-ish, once they get to be military-age males, all of a sudden, without that discipline, they're left to be raised by the streets, and we see increased crime as a result. That's an epidemic in Mississippi, and we've got to crack at both of these problems, both the enforcement side and the root cause side.
Either, burial or incarceration, I don't think we have any answers for that. Let me ask this, though, and it's a rather sensitive question. And I'm not leaning one way or the other, but have our movement over the last years to take advantage of the Second Amendment to do what the Second Amendment allows us to do, have more maybe liberal laws, gun laws, or open carry caused a problem?
Well, I don't think so, because I think the people who violate these sorts of laws, who are willing to kill another human, aren't particularly interested in gun control laws.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, because you hear liberals talking about, well, look what Mississippi has done, or they'll point to another state. But most of those people are either too young, or a lot of them already have a felony.
Yeah, that's the sad part of this, is that the point of being a criminal is to ignore criminal statutes and do whatever you want to do, and that includes gun control statutes.
We'll talk more about this with the State Auditor Shad White coming up in a moment or two, right after this. State Auditor Shad White with us. I don't see any gray hair in that daddy's hair yet. I did my Just for Men this morning, just raked it through. I do not use Just for Men. I was going to say that probably won't work.
It's not going to work.
It might work with one child, but it ain't going to work with more than one.
With an 8-month-old and a 3-year-old, not happening. Not happening.
All right, live from the Trustmark studios, where your perfect home loan will fit your budget to a T, as in Trustmark, equal housing lender, member FDIC. Well, we were talking about open carry and things such as that. And I can't help but And you said more police on the streets. Number one. And the situation in many parts of the country is getting worse. It's not getting better.
Yep.
As far as people do not want to get in that profession. They don't want to be slapped on and spit on and kicked for choosing that particular profession. And it was an opportunity missed when the President of the United States of America came to Jackson, Mississippi to tour two of the most fabulous new museums in the country. And the word on the street was that he was more than welcome to sit down and talk with the Jackson mayor, maybe some federal funds. And I'm not sure that this is true or not, but there were some offers to help in any way they possibly could. And he was shunned completely. So you can reach out for different programs, but you have to have leadership in the city of Jackson, period.
And we have to acknowledge the problem, too. When the mayor's going out and saying the city is safe in the middle of a crime wave, that's not helpful. That's not helpful. And two, let's talk about the basic idea that you mentioned earlier. It's really good to put more resources toward law enforcement, more prosecutors, more judges, more police officers. That's really important. I mean, I think that we have a ton of underappreciated police officers, and we need more of them, and we need to pay them better here in the state of Mississippi. But creating more positions for police officers and allocating more money for those positions is not sufficient, because what we have going on in this country is something called the Ferguson effect. It's named after Ferguson, Missouri, and what happened there. And what we know, based on research on the Ferguson effect, is that when you badmouth police, one, fewer people want to be police, so we're going to have to start giving police credit for putting their lives on the line for all of us and for our safety. But two, for the police that are already in uniform, when you badmouth them and you talk about them negatively, what we see is that they pull back from high crime areas, because there's this fear that if they act in self-defense in one of these high crime areas, that they're going to be fired, or they're going to be unreasonably prosecuted, or whatever it may be. And so who ends up hurting from that? It's the people who live in those high poverty, high crime areas. That's the problem. So more resources are important, and I really applaud the bipartisan group of folks who got together this past legislative session and appropriated more money for more judges, prosecutors, and police officers in the Capital Zone particularly. But we've also got to talk about the Ferguson effect, and we've got to talk about what happens when you constantly demean the law enforcement officers of this country.
Geez, you could actually use the Ferguson effect on another thing that you were talking about, and that's the brain drain, because when you have bad-mouthing going on in the state of Mississippi by the media in this state, all constantly bad-mouth and put down the state of Mississippi, a lot of times after you've heard this all the way through school, and when you graduate, you don't want to stay here.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Again,
I hear that all the time.
Again, some of the Ferguson effect applies also to brain drain.
That's exactly right. And look, I've experienced this myself. I grew up in rural Mississippi, and then I went to the University of Mississippi. I left. I've lived in Washington, D.C., I've lived in England, I've lived in Massachusetts, other places. And I remember thinking, I was told that the grass was greener on the other side and that the world was so much better outside of Mississippi. And the more I experienced, the more I realized that Mississippi is one of the best places to live that you could possibly live. And I think young people are being told over and over and over again, this place is not great, you need to get out. And I think they're being told that, too, by some of the professors who we pay to teach them at our public universities. They go up there and we pay them a salary to indoctrinate these kids and then tell them that they need to leave the state of Mississippi. I've gone and talked to full classrooms of students at universities here, and I've asked some of them, okay, how many of y'all are staying? I've gone to talk to classrooms where nearly 100% of kids raise their hand and say they're leaving after this. And some of that is just people doing their own thing. They want to get out. They want to see the world. That's fine. But some of it is they're being told they need to do this by folks who they look up to as mentors, like the professors. And that kind of stuff has got to stop. We're not going to make our state better by bad-mouthing Mississippi.
I want to switch gears here just a little bit. You recently announced that Henry Grunow been convicted of embezzlement in Newton County, and this was a case prosecuted by the DA there. He worked as director of the Mississippi Veterans Affairs Cemetery in Newton County, and he used some funds, and I think total the demand letter that you sent out was almost $30,000.
Yep.
My question is on this one. On those embezzlement cases involving Mississippi Veterans Affairs, are there any other cases that you're working on?
Well, I can't speak to any ongoing or potential ongoing investigations. We only can report on the end of investigations when we arrest somebody or when somebody gets sentenced. And in that case, the reason we reported on it was that individual was sentenced. I will say that case was turned over to us by officials at the Mississippi Department of Veterans Affairs. So that really shows you the importance of people looking for embezzlement, looking for crime, looking for misspending inside their own offices and speaking up when they see something.
I was just wondering, where's the line of responsibility for the Mississippi State's Office of State Auditor and the feds? Is there a dual line there somewhere, or they have to refer it to you as far as the state auditor is concerned?
No, they don't have to. I mean, I think the way I would describe it is we have an overlap in our jurisdiction. So, a lot of times we'll see somebody who, let's say, has stolen money, and then they steal that money and they launder it through a series of bank transactions to another account, and then they spend it. When you see that sort of situation, what you're looking at is, one, a violation of state law. They've embezzled. But two, because they used wire transactions, they've also violated federal law. So that's called wire fraud under the federal statutes. In that situation, we have the jurisdiction to go and investigate it, but also the FBI has jurisdiction to go in and investigate it, and state prosecutors have the jurisdiction to go in and prosecute violations of state embezzlement laws, and federal prosecutors have the jurisdiction to go in and prosecute violation of wire fraud violations. So really, there's an overlap there. Some cases we see don't overlap. Sometimes it's pure embezzlement with no wire fraud. Sometimes it's wire fraud, and it's difficult to get them on state charges for whatever reason, but a lot of times there's an overlap in jurisdiction.
Yeah. Let me go back to, we were talking about the court system, and that also has to be better handled, and we have some deficiencies there. We need to certainly take care of that. But there's some people talking about a new judicial district within the Capitol Street area as far as a court district. Is that something that you think would be a good idea, or there are some who felt like it's not going to do much good because it's only going to encompass just a small area of Jackson?
I think the main thing that we ought to keep our eye on is more judges to adjudicate cases faster. And that could take on several different forms. I mean, it could take on the form of a separate judicial district, which is not a bad idea, or it could just take on the form of more judges appointed by the state Supreme Court and funded by the state. I think you could do it one of several different ways to skin that cat. But the main thing to me when you're talking about fixing our judicial system is pushing more resources into that system so that cases get adjudicated faster. And the reason that's really important is we see that some crime in Jackson is due to this kind of catch and release dynamic. A few months ago, there was a guy named Jrotc White who had been indicted and arrested for multiple crimes. He'd been let out on bond without actually even paying the bond in that case. And then he went about 4 miles from Fondren and murdered 2 women in a motel over there. That's just one example. One of the Mudbug shooters from the Mississippi Mudbugs Festival had previously been arrested for armed robbery but had been let out. That shows you that we've got to have a system that is better prepared once we arrest somebody for a violent crime or for a crime that's trending in the direction of violence, to take them, adjudicate them, keep them in jail, not have a system where we're going to keep them in jail so long that we have constitutional problems, but adjudicate their case quickly and fairly. Yeah. And then we're going to have some judges who send them to prison for a substantial amount of time if they do something violent, because as we know from looking at crime statistics from the last 50 years, if you want to cut down on crime, you need more police, and also you need more military-age males who are committing violent offenses off the streets. Those are the two big things.
I do want to, in the final segment in a moment or two, ask you this, though, because we have a new crop of new demos out there that is frightening when they're 14 and 15 years old.
Yeah.
Can we handle that? Do we have the capacity to handle it? Do we have the will? What do we do with these people? Once you have committed an armed robbery and fired a weapon during the act of an armed robbery, how do you transition that kid back into normal school? Final segment coming up next. Segment from the Trustmark Studios. It is the state auditor, Shad White. When I'm thinking of the song and a couple of other things at the same time here. All right, so forgot the question I was going to ask you.
we were talking about crime, and then we started talking about young men and 14-year-olds. How do you handle those?
Yeah, it's exactly right. What do we do with these? Because you just can't put them back in the system.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think you have to take each individual person as an individual, whether they're 14 or 24 or 34, when they commit some sort of violent crime, and you've got to assess whether they can be rehabilitated, what the right intervention is for them, and for violent crimes, it's going to involve prison. It needs to involve prison. But I'll tell you a thought that I have had, and something we've noticed as I've gone through the state auditor's office. There are programs that get at this basic fundamental problem of young men being without a father and being without discipline in the home. And an example is the Jrotc program in Jackson Public Schools. It's a small program. Not many students are in it, and I wish it were much, much bigger. But what we see in that program is that for students who go into it, they are taught military history, they're taught to drill, they're taught to march, they're taught to show up on time. The program is run by retired military service members, and what students get out of that is a sense of structure and discipline. And you look at the results, they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal, especially compared to the results of the general population of Jackson Public School students. They have a 100% graduation rate out of the JROTC program, 100%. They have a 95% college placement rate. They have higher ACT scores. They have nearly perfect attendance records, which is amazing when you think about it compared to JPS students generally. And I think the reason is that there's a ton of structure. And also the reason is that these military service members will take the students on field trips, and they'll say, look, if you work hard in high school, you show up on time, you do what you need to do, here's what a plumber does every day. You could be a plumber, and here's what they make, and there's the car or the truck that plumber drives. And that's really getting at the very basic fundamental problem that can drive somebody to crime. Without that structure, without a pathway to a better life, you see a lot of young people making a lot of mistakes and being friends with the wrong people, and ending up pushing them into a position where they're making some mistakes that affect the rest of their lives.
C-Smart text line, and they're right on. Rap music constantly talks about popping a cap, someone's shells hitting the ground. The music is embraced by so many people, white and black, for that matter. She says, I've been a school teacher, public school, for 37 years. I've seen school go from having, a morning devotional over the intercom to absolutely not allowing prayer, no mention of God, parents not wanting to be parents, disciplining their child, and it's gone crazy. The culture is working against us. I didn't mean to play this, and I'm going to play the whole thing, but this was an event that apparently is traveling through the Delta area, and there was a lot of brouhaha several weeks ago because it was in the Clarksdale Civic Auditorium.
Another epic Saturday, the ABC Bash. We ain't talking the alphabet. We want to see anything but code. The less you wear, the less you pay. Cash prize to the sexiest lady in the building. Ladies free to 11 p.m. and 2-for-1 sex on the beach to 12. The rich gang will be in the building. Wait a minute. Who he said?
This is about the raunchiest you could possibly get, male strippers and other things going on. And it's a traveling venue throughout the Mississippi Delta and some other places. I don't know if you've heard about it, but I was shocked when I saw that. And there were a lot of people asking the mayor, why in the heck would he have them lease out or rent out the Civic Auditorium? And apparently the last word on that was there was no prohibition against it. But the culture has got to change.
Yeah, and speaking of culture, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to this question of who are your heroes as young people, and if young men look up to other godly, disciplined, strong leaders as their heroes who conduct themselves in an adult way, then they're going to try to pattern their lives after those men and women. And if they look up to other folks, they're going to try to pattern their lives after those folks. And so, going back to the JROTC program, I think one of the reasons that program is successful is that you put these retired service members who have dedicated their lives to something bigger than themselves, the protection of this country, and you put those folks right in front of young men and women, and you give them a role model, somebody to pattern their life after. And when you do that, what you're going to see is young folks saying, I want to be like that, and being like that requires me to show up on time, make my bed, make sure my clothes are put together, all those basic things, those life sorts of skills that open other doors in the future that don't lead to some sort of pattern of crime.
With the sad thing about that now also, is that the opportunities have never been better. The opportunities to go and grab the American dream have never been better through education, through job opportunities, whatever you want. It's there, but how do we get it back on track? I do not know. Shad, it's always good seeing you, sir. Thank you so very much. Always very informative, and your passion does come through. We appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me.
You got it. Shad White.